will have developer update live streams. Our next one is going to be in July. But we are most definitely going to have more of these Campfire chats here in the future. And with those developer update live streams, you will get those big announcements and the big reveals and us going into more detail about big updates that might be coming up in the future. But for Campfire chats, we want to use this format to kind of chat with the community and make sure that you all get an opportunity to actually hear from us and talk to us a little bit more often.
And so I think these are two great people to represent the, that 90 rated game, and then the ability to play it since it was launched. So it's awesome. And yeah, thank you so much to everybody who play. We just crossed 350 million hours of play, which is phenomenal and very exciting. So like for the client, what we call the client, so the way you're playing on your actual device, that because we support multiple platforms, we have to often go through certification. And so that's one of the things around pacing that we have to oftentimes pre-plan out what we're fixing. And so hot fixes are stuff we can kind of do on the fly. It doesn't require a certification pass. Again, it's meant to be seamless. So occasionally we'll have some hiccups as we, but it's sort of philosophically, it's something that we decided as a team that rather than bringing the whole game down for an hour to roll out a server change, we would do sort of these sort of rolling changes. And 9 times out of 10, no issues. Occasionally, based on just the scale, like we haven't worked at the scale before, and so sometimes when you're refreshing this number of servers with this number of players on it, we could hit a hiccup, and we've hit a couple, during launch that. But our intention is to keep the game up all the time and just try to. But that being said, like I said, we often want to plan well in advance because we have to QA it. It's not like we can turn. That's one of the things. I feel like the feedback is I have this problem. I want to see it fixed tomorrow, and you're like, I would love to do that for you, but we have to go through CERT and we have to QA it and we have to do all this work. And so we already have a big, real patch coming. And so that's something that's gone through certification. It's out there. It's going to address a lot of things, including performance issues. And it's so big, we're actually talking about there's the potential we may actually choose to have a maintenance window and say, we're going to bring the whole game down. We're going to apply this big patch, and then we're going to bring it all back up.
This right here is actually, it's 13 pages, but it's not even done yet. But it is just an early preview of kind of what we're putting together. I have it here. We probably won't go into detail of it all, okay. But we will have it posted, obviously, when the patch does actually hit. But we do have a lot of different topics we did want to talk about.
I think it's one of the interesting aspects is I wanted to create this meme of we want a balanced game where there's no meta and every build is viable, and everybody's like, yay! And they're like, we've reduced the power of this class, and be like, what's going on? Table flip, and you're like, what? We have a philosophy of as part of balancing the game, whether that be the world or the classes, there will be pluses and minuses that have to be applied to the game, and the notion of, oh look, I remember Destiny 2 had Loot Cave, and we're like, there's a Loot Cave, let's just sit here and farm loot, and we're having so much fun. It's Christmas morning all day long, and that can't persist. For the good of the game, that has to not exist at some point, right? And so that's a problem that they fixed, and you understand eventually why they did that. I think there's some of that when we have 350 million hours playing against the game, and we go across your intentions from a design perspective about how do you want players to be gaining XP and sort of growing their levels and kind of what is their path for? It felt like what we started to see was that a player pattern that was non-ideal. Is
and actually talk about them a little bit more in detail. I think probably the biggest one I think that people have been talking about the most has been around dungeons. As you guys know, we've had a few hot fixes. And by few, I mean 4 in a row, yes. Yep. Totally understand. Yep. Of hot fixes where we had a line where we did mention that we were reducing elite pack levels and so forth, or adjusting them specifically in certain dungeons, with the goal to be longer dungeons having more elite packs, and of course shorter ones having less than what a longer one would specifically have. But I would say we've really gotten to kind of a new baseline now of where we are.
It seemed like it was a contrast thing. I think Joe can speak to, but I think the expectation was, oh, nightmare dungeons are the end game. That's the place I'm going to go, quote unquote, farm. But right now the normal dungeons, because the elite density is so high, it's better to farm a normal dungeon than it is a nightmare. And so they seemed like they were kind of slightly out of whack from that perspective. I don't know if that's a technical term, slightly out of whack, but
Seen it many times.
yeah,
yes.
exactly. Is that accurate, or how do you feel?
Yeah, we had some cases where among side dungeons, some side dungeons had dramatically more elites than other side dungeons, and so it really felt like if you're thinking about efficiency, it only made sense to farm those.
Right.
But more broadly, I mean, you were talking about Nightmare Dungeons. Nightmare Dungeons have, first off, actually, you know, the significant majority of our players haven't finished the campaign yet. So there are lots of players that are still playing through the campaign.
Right.
But many of the people who are watching this stream, in fact, and our dedicated players play through content much more quickly.
Right.
And have been experiencing this situation with the dungeons, right?
Sure.
So going to Nightmare Dungeons, Nightmare Dungeons are explicitly set up to be highly replayable, right? Through the sigil affixes, through the variety of Nightmare Dungeons that are available, to the changes to monsters that occur inside them. And so we want them to be a great place to farm, including if you want to farm dungeons over and over. If you
Right.
want to loop dungeons, Nightmare Dungeons are set up to be good at doing that.
That's
right?
the intention.
Yeah. So what we're going to do there is we're going to increase the amount of XP that you get from Nightmare Dungeons. And our goal with this is to make Nightmare Dungeons more efficient to do than side dungeons.
Right.
Because they're designed to be more replayable.
And does that take into account, like, Nightmare Dungeons have essentially a travel time to get to them?
Right. So this is a great point. So in order to, when you think about efficiency, if you think about XP per hour or XP per minute,
Right.
and we actually have telemetry on this so we can see what it looks like. You can't just look at the XP that you're getting from the Nightmare Dungeon, because you have to spend some of the time traveling to that Nightmare Dungeon. And in fact, Nightmare Dungeons are a variety of distances away from the nearest waypoint
Right.
or teleport. So it actually varies depending on which Nightmare Dungeon you're going to.
Right.
And so that can also have the effect, if you're thinking about the efficiency aspect of it, of XP per hour or loot per hour,
Right.
of sort of making it hard to justify choosing a Nightmare Dungeon that's far from a teleport point.
Sure.
So the second thing that we're going to do here is we're going to modify the way that sigils work so that they teleport you to Nightmare Dungeons on use.
So they teleport you, or do they create a place a waypoint to the dungeon?
They will create a waypoint that allows you to teleport. But yes, you'll be able to teleport to. That's an important distinction.
Right.
But the effect is that you'll be able to teleport to your Nightmare Dungeons, and you'll be able to loop from the end of a Nightmare Dungeon into your next Nightmare Dungeon. If you want to loop them
Right.
again, you may have to leave the Nightmare Dungeon using an interface, but you'll be able to go from Nightmare Dungeon to Nightmare Dungeon without traveling between them.
Right.
And that allows us to have the XP, calculate the XP buff to make sure that those are the most efficient to do, because we're removing the travel time aspect of it.
Okay, so we're improving the rewards from Nightmare Dungeons to make them more what the intention was. That's the place you farm.
Yeah.
We're removing the need to have a travel time, because a waypoint will appear and you and your party can go there, so it shortens it.
Right.
Like the waypoint one in particular sounds like a reasonably large change. So from a player perspective, what should expectations be about, hey, that sounds awesome, or at least for me, I'm responding, that sounds awesome. I don't know if they agree yet, but I think that sounds awesome. So what kind of timing, what range of timing are you thinking?
It is, you know, Tiffany was just talking about like the kinds of things that we can do very quickly and easily.
This isn't supposed to be one of
It's
them.
a little, but this is something that's really important to many of our most dedicated players. And so we're working very hard on this right now, actually, and yesterday as well, to get it in before Season 1 launches.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so
Season 1, we're saying mid to late July.
mid to late July.
So we're saying that this change could happen anytime between, in the next, whatever, 4 weeks or whatever.
Correct.
So that's what we're focused on.
You go to craft your gem in the same way that you do today, and you just use a certain amount of that material. So it's similar to the amount of equivalent like actual gem inventory slots that you're using now,
Right.
but as materials, and you can use that to craft the gem that goes into
It's
it.
kind of a win-win because it's saving you inventory space, but it's also saving you stash space. Because right now, I'm just like filling up my stash with gems.
Yeah.
But now if it's just materials I'm carrying, notion of, oh, I didn't understand there was caps. Like, I am not as hardcore to have 10,000 veiled crystals, but I know some people out there are, and they're realizing like, oh, you can only carry 10,000, and there isn't a way to put veiled crystals into the stash or whatever to do with it. Like, what is the thinking around caps? Because sometimes it's like, oh, we were trying to force you to go do an action. We like much like the opals thing now, like, oh, you go roll something because more opals are falling, but. I don't think that it doesn't feel like that's the same for veiled crystal. As an example, veiled crystal, like how do you think about caps and materials?
Yeah, the caps, the materials aren't. There's no particular reason to cap the veiled crystals at 10,000. We're just going to make that bigger.
Yeah.
When we think about seasons, one of the things that we think is most important is delivering new content.
Right.
Because that is new stuff for everyone. Like, if we want to make sure that every season is delivering new content, and then on top of that, bring in important fixes, bring in some quality of life improvements. And so, I know that I've seen some lists, like people have helpfully made like some lists, like here are a bunch of quality of life fixes that we would like, or that would help me, as a player, so I think what you'll see is that over time, as seasons roll out, you're going to see those, like we've been talking about with Season 1 and Season 2, you're going to continue to see those things. You're not going to see a season that's like, sorry, we didn't
Bare
make any
bones,
content,
yeah.
but here's a bunch of fixes.
Yeah, and
because we think that content is really important.
So hard to necrologics.
Well, I'm hoping it sounds.
Why are you
like
sounding it out like a 4-year-old? The necrologics. Why is that so hard?
I mean, it's like logics or something. Can we teleport to people without going to town first? Is that can be an option in the future?
So we're carefully looking at the teleporting. We want it to be easy to meet up with friends. The waypoint in town is our normal way to move to places.
More direct teleport?
It's something we'll keep an eye on.
Okay.
We aren't planning to change that right now.
But yeah.
Question from our own team as associate designer.
He mentions you get the renown from Fog Warclear and the Altars of Discovery, which is what Joe had just mentioned, but then enough to get you through the first 2 tiers of renown in each zone. So
that was my fault. I thought it worked the way it works in the Eternal now. It doesn't. It's basically we're just preloading you a bunch of renown that will then unlock the stuff for you. I get it. Yeah.
Got a pocket Joey P over there.